Welcome to Arizona Longtails on this episode of unboxing a Predator 301.
The 301 is the entry-level engine that you would put on the 8 horsepower to the 16 horsepower kits that are out there. We now have the Predator 212, we have the Predator 301, and then Eddie on the border just rebuilt my Predator 420. So now we have all 3 of these together. We also have 3 of the small Honda clones in the 212 class. One being the Duramax 7 horsepower electric start, the Tillotson 212, and the Predator 212 non-Hemi.
So far, the small engines have been going with the Mud Skipper smaller kits. They're great beginner units, real customizable. This seems to be the smallest engine on the next size platforms of Longtails.
Ideally, if you're starting out with a 14-foot flat-bottom John boat, you should probably start out with a 8 to 16 horsepower kit. Reason being, it gives you a lot of variable room in moving up in motors, instead of starting with a 7 horsepower kit and having to try to play juggle upgrade on the motors themselves. It's a Honda GX270 clone. Which is a 9 horsepower motor. We're going to go over the specs of this motor. It's a 301cc. It's at 54 pounds. To put that in comparison, it's not much more heavier than the other small 212s. For instance, the Duramax 7 horsepower is 42 pounds. So doing some mental math here, 12-pound difference between those two. On the Predators, the engines are 38 pounds, so not that much difference in weight-wise between the two. On the Predator 420, that motor is almost 80 pounds, and I'm guessing with fuel, it's way more than 80. This guy right here is almost 15 foot-pounds of torque, so the foot-pounds of torque is not very that off dissimilar between this and the 420. However, this one is approximately 8 horsepower. The 420 is approximately 13 horsepower. So there is about a 7 horsepower difference. It's low compression, just like the other motors, and then its maximum RPM is at 3,600, which is to be expected within the big bore motors. They just don't move as fast as the small bore motors. The Tillotson that we have, that I would really like to compare to this one as well, its RPM is much higher. When I had it out of the water, it was governing out at 5,000 RPM. This guy looks like it's going to govern out at 3,600. So it's going to be interesting because there's no torque specs that we can find on the internet. If you guys can find them for us, that would be amazing. But on the Tillotson 212 Hemi, we can only find the horsepower specs on the dyno, but we can't find any torque specs. So it's going to be interesting to determine which motor is going to be more torqueier in the water. We're going to get to the unboxing now. All right, please don't report me to OSHA. This motor is not as unwieldy as the 420. I can tell you, when I had the 412 on the day that I tested it, before the motor burned out on me on the water, it felt very tippy in the rear. It was not very comfortable. It's not like these guys. These guys I can tip in any direction that I wanted. As I had the tail flipped into the boat, and when I was out there, I went to flip the tail out onto the water after I paddled out into the water. And when I flipped the tail out, the corner tucked into the water and I took on a little bit of water, and I really did not like that feeling.
There's about 20-pound difference from this one to the 420, and then 20-pound difference from this one to the 212, roughly. That's where in the back of the transom, you know, it's a lot of weight, it's a lot of leverage at that point.
And that's where I'm wondering if this guy is going to be the happy medium in power. It's 8 horsepower. It has almost the same amount of torque as that big 420, but it's in a little bit smaller package. I imagine this one is going to feel better on the transom. When I went and tested out the 420, I put it on my 1436 John boat. And when I took off, it was like the scariest thing I've ever felt on a John boat. I was like this. I was just straight up and down. Just literally took off. And I was like, what I can estimate the speed that I was at 20 miles an hour plus. And then the rings burned out on the motor. Apparently, whenever motors sit for a long time, when you go to start them up, you need to put some oil through the spark plug area, about 5 milliliters or so, and then start it up. Otherwise, you'll burn up your rings, which is what I did, but Eddie on the board rebuilt my motor.
That's the nice thing about the Predators. They're a clone to a Honda. I was looking at the owner's manual, got the full parts list of breakdown for each component needed for the piston, the crankshaft, and with the aftermarket support available for these, you know, you could even upgrade it. You know, if something fails, you know what's the weak point, and you can go from there.
All right, so we'd like to give a quick shout out to our first ever sponsor of the show here. And they sent us out some really nice threads. I was very, very surprised. They sent us a bunch of shirts, they sent us a hat, they sent us a bunch of stickers. They sent me the nicest space skater I've probably ever used.
Dude, that's going to be the good luck one out in the water.
For sure.
And definitely out here in the water, you're just fully covered up. You know, the sun's brutal. There's no way to beat it.
We literally live in the sunniest place on earth. That's not an exaggeration. Google it. Alright, so going into the shafts here. So on the Mud Skipper 7 horsepower kits, 2 to 7 horsepower kits, they sell on the kits themselves, they sell a 5/8 shaft kit, which is the smallest ones that they carry. You could use a 3 horsepower Harbor Freight motor, a 3 horsepower Predator. I don't know what you would use that on. Maybe a kayak. I have no idea.
Kayak would be nice.
However, what's most commonly used is the 3/4. So the 3/4 shaft, which runs pretty much all of the 212 style Honda clone motors, and that's the most common shaft. On this motor right here, on its keyway shaft here, this is a 1-inch shaft. So what's awesome about the 8 to 16 horsepower kits is that there's a big variety of sizes motors. So you could use the GX70 Honda clone motors to include this 301 Predator, and they all have the same bolt pattern and they have the same shaft. So this shaft is a 1-inch shaft. They have the specs for the bolt pattern here, but they're all the same from 8 horsepower to 16 horsepower. In my mind reference, the motors that I can think of would be this guy right here, the Honda GX 279 horsepower, the Harbor Freight Predator 420 Duramax motors, which I've had very good experience with those, in particular with the 7 horsepower electric start, is the 16 horsepower version of this, and the 18 horsepower of Duramax as well will actually bolt to these kits as well. And those create a lot more torque when I looked at the specs than the Predator 420.
We want to thank you guys for watching. Me and Joey enjoy doing these videos. We're trying to get these first couple episodes be a bit technical so you guys could see what we're comparing. And once we're in the water, getting some hours behind the boats and these engines, end up coming up with good data on what's the best rounded setup for boats. Like and subscribe. We want to be posting videos weekly, and there's still a lot out there to explore, and hopefully you guys could follow along with us. Thank you.